Hi, how's everyone doing? Welcome to my first podcast. My name is Roy Salazar, and I'm very excited to be initiating this podcast. I'm very excited for the opportunity to sit here and share with you some of my thoughts, opinions, insight, experiences on the theme and topic of this podcast, which is growing up without a father in the house, growing up with no dad. Right now, we live in a society. I live in the United States of America, and I know that it's not just an issue here in this country, but issue everywhere, around the globe, growing up without a father and stuff. And, that for me, will forever leave a open void. It will forever leave an impact that I think I'm just going to take with me to the grave. And it's not to say that I haven't healed from it. It's not to say that I haven't forgiven, that I've made peace with myself, with everyone, with my biological father. I also want to mention that I did have a stepdad. I did spend a few years living with my mom and my stepdad. And I will touch base on that. I do want to share my experience and thoughts on that. And to be honest with you, just real quick, I think that was even more hurtful or more disappointing than seeing my biological father, walk away, at a very young age. So yeah, I really want to share these thoughts with the audience, and again, just the reason, part of why I'm even doing this, part of why I feel like I should do this, should share my insights, share my experience, is because I'll be honest with you, I grew up with minimal guidance, minimal knowledge, and just minimal information about the world around me, the life around me. It could be coincidence, or maybe it's just my personal background. Everybody has their own walk of life. Everybody has their own journey, and everybody's going to see the world, their life according to their own eyes, and this is just how I saw mine. And I grew up, naive in many ways. I grew up very naive to a lot of things around me, which would add to how my life was shaped, how I dealt with relationships, how I dealt with friendships, how I dealt with society, my superiors, elders, co-workers, teachers, all of this really, for me, just really come to shape my perception, my perspective, how about myself and about the world around me, and I hope that this can serve as information. I know that this is not, I know that I'm not a therapist, and in no way, shape, or form is this any form of therapy, but it's just information. I think information that could be useful to somebody out there, and maybe somebody needs to hear this right about now. And that's how I feel. I feel like maybe right now, what I'm sharing right now could help someone, could make somebody's life, could make somebody's day, somebody's life a little better, And that's why I'm doing this. This, again, I'm no professional therapist, but we're living in a time now where information is so vital, and we have access to it now. We have access to the information now, and so many tools that this is, this is just a great chance for me to leave an imprint. Even part of growing up. I always wondered, what was my purpose of life? Why am I here on this planet? What purpose do I serve? And I gotta be honest with you. I mean, doing this right now is very liberating for me. It's very liberating for my soul. It's just, I've done a couple podcasts before, but this one is very close to home. This podcast here is very close to me. It means a lot to me because I gotta be honest with you. I mean, I'm 40 years old. And I have yet ways to go. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of things that I dismissed. Well, first of all, just let me share with you, I'm married now. I've been married for about 5, going on 6 years. I do have 2 kids and one on the way. One is 7, who's on the spectrum, by the way. And that in itself is a challenge. It'll definitely stretch your character, and I know it has stretched my character. I do have a 4-year-old daughter as well. So, I gotta be honest with you. I mean, I did not realize how much I still needed to understand, how much I still needed to know, when they were born, when I got married, how much, I just totally dismissed some of the things that I would come to need to understand and know and experience by the time I got married and had kids, and frankly, I'm doing a lot of that now, but I've come to realize that it's never too late. It's not too late, to learn. It's not too late to learn. It's not too late to grow. And I've come to understand that, no matter where you're at, that can be your starting point. That can be your starting point. Because I know that when I had my first kid, it was tough. It was tough. And it really, the situation that, we found ourselves in with my wife, with my son, being born premature, having to spend about a month in the NICU. He did get some an infection in the NICU. All these things, bring you to your knees, and I did not know how to express myself emotionally. I did not know how to react or respond because I only knew the way of life to be a certain way, and I had to be a certain way. I didn't know how to handle it, but I knew, because by the time my son was born, I was already like 35, I knew I wasn't a kid anymore. I knew I wasn't a kid anymore, and I knew that I had to rise to the occasion. So with the little that I understood, with the little that I knew, I made, I did my best. I did my best to rise to the occasion. I did my best to handle the situation as best as I understood and knew. But that really made me reflect. That really made me reflect on parenthood, what your role is as a dad, who you should be as a dad, who you should be as a father, a husband, all these things, really, really just came into perspective for me. And I really had no one to lean back on. I really had no one to lean back on. It's something that I would have to take on my own. It's something that my wife and I had to do on our own. And so eventually my son came home, and even when my son came home for the next 4 years, I would say for like the next 4 years, were very, very serious. My son's 7 years old now, but I think that those 4 critical years really helped us. And of course, my wife is always, she's a mom, she has the maternal instincts. So obviously my wife was going to be a mother to like the 100th power, when it comes to handling her child, so I learned from her too. I had to learn, I had to step up. There was no wiggle room. My wife expected me to step into the role as a father, as a dad, and do what I had to do. There was no wiggle room. There was no room for excuse or comfort zone. And so and I knew that, and I understood that. So that's part of the reason why I had no choice, but to step up, and I had no choice, and again, so let's get back to the topic, the theme. I realized how much I didn't know. Would it have been nice to have like a father in my life, maybe to give me that kind of support that I needed? Yeah. Obviously, who's gonna say no, right? Who's gonna say no? But that wasn't the reality for me. That wasn't my reality, and it's not my reality. It wasn't my reality growing up. It wasn't my reality when I got married and my kids were born. It's not my reality now, and it's not gonna be my reality, moving forward. It's just not gonna be my reality. It's just, that's my truth. And so, I just want to share that with somebody who probably needs to hear that. If whether you're a young man, whether you're a young person, who feels like you're out of touch with the right direction, or whether you're a grown man, because I'll be honest with you, I've come to realize this has no age. This sort of impact that you'll have doesn't come with any sort of age restriction. I've known men who have grown up without their fathers, and obviously, these people, grow up bruised, scarred for life, and they have no choice but to carry that with them into manhood. And I'll see these men, around, walking up and down the street, going, living everyday life, and it's just a weight that you can see in people, and the way that they function, all this is, invisible, all this is something that's invisible, it's not something that's physical. It's not something that's tangible, you can't see it, you can probably see it, you can probably see it on someone's face, in someone's spirit, you can probably see it on somebody carrying, you can probably see somebody carrying that with them, of course, this is something invisible, it's more of a spiritual thing, something that impacts your soul, there's nothing that, it's nothing that, you don't wear a sign, there's no sign that you carry, it's just something that, that it's just something that about you, just like me, something that I know about me, I had to grow up, I had no choice but to grow up, as a teenager, I grew up, I had to get a job, I got a job as a teenager, I had to work, I went to college, I spent my 20s learning and growing, then I got married in my 30s, I had kids in my 30s, and I did this all on my own, with the help of my mom and grandma and my surrounding family members, I did all this, with their help, with their support, with their love, so I don't know who, if you have a support system, I don't know what your support system is, that was my support system growing up. That was my support system, when I was in high school, even college, in my 20s, that was my support system, you know what I mean? So, whoever your support system, if you don't have a support system, find one, I'll tell you straight up, find your support system. If you already have one, appreciate it, because those are the people that are going to care for you, And so, just hopefully, I'm staying consistent with, what the topic is for this podcast. Again, I'll be honest with you, I grew up naive in many ways and had to do what I had to do, but there's a lot of things that, I carried with me into adulthood unresolved, and, now I have the strength, now I have the knowledge, understanding, the tenacity, the desire to seek out answers, to resolve these things, and I'm much better off for it, and that's all I want to do. I just want the audience to know that, that you can do the same thing too. Yeah, what can I say? I wish I had this knowledge growing up. I can't tell you. Well, I'll be honest with you, right? So, when you're a young kid, you don't want to hear it, right? When you're a young kid, you're not trying to hear it. Especially you're angry and you're mad. You're resented. That your father wasn't around. You're mad at the world. I'll be honest with you. Growing up, I had some friends, and it's funny, right? Because I can definitely say I had two sets of friends growing up, right? I remember the first group of friends that I had. Oddly enough, these kids were into doing bad things, right? These kids were doing into bad things. I remember hanging out with these kids. They were in my neighborhood because, just to share with you, because I grew up in a single home, but just my mom and my grandma. My mom would work 2 jobs, possibly even 3. So she wasn't always home, and it was just my grandma. My grandma was the one kind of just watching over me. So my mom, tried to restrict me from going out. I wasn't allowed to go out anywhere. I had to stay confined to the house, and it was just me, my mom, and grandma. So, I grew up watching a lot of TV. I grew up watching a lot of TV, man. A lot of, the way I think and stuff, is very similar to TV themes. I don't know if you ever. There used to be a show called Herman's Head. I don't know if you ever saw that. I mean, that was back in the, I think, 80s, early 90s. It was called Herman's Head. And that show, man, for me, it made so much sense to me because in that show, you had a guy who had like different characters in his head doing the thoughts for him. And based on what they were thinking and what they were doing, that's how the guy would act, And that's how I felt. I felt like that was what was happening in my head, when things were happening, when I was experiencing life. I thought it was a cool show. It didn't last that long, but I thought it was a cool show. And so, I watched a lot of TV, man. So I used to see the world in kind of in the same perspective, the world's a big stage and we're all characters, that kind of stuff. And so my mom, the only place she would allow me to kind of go out and play was in the front yard. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere else. And I was only allowed to go in the front yard, and only my grandma had to make sure she could see me from the window. That's how I grew up, man. And obviously you're a kid, so you'll take whatever space you're allowed. So I would play in the front yard, or the way that we lived in some condos that looked like apartments. So I had the front yard, or the front space, I would say, because I did live in apartments on the first floor with the balcony. So there was the front yard, the front space, and then the back space. So you could either my grandma could watch me from the balcony, or she could watch me from the back window. And there was a big open space, sort of like a field in the back of the apartment, where you could see me from the window. And I would play there. And, I'd play there, and the field was big enough that some kids caught on to it, and they would play football there. And so because it was in front, because it was in that window space, my grandma could see me, so I was actually allowed to play in that space. And because a lot of football games happened there, like tackle football, in the neighborhood, like neighborhood football, right? That's where I managed to get some of my experience playing with other kids, because I was the only child, and I was not allowed to go anywhere and do much. My mom worked 2 jobs, possibly even 3. So, we're living on a tight budget. I wasn't allowed to play sports. I wasn't allowed to get on the bus. There was a lot. I was just very restricted. And so, I played football there with the guys. It was fun. It was great, and at some point it died out and everybody moved on, and that was it. And for a good while, I had no friends. Nobody came around, that kind of stuff. So, and I just remember one day I was playing there with some guy. He was actually my age. Probably a little bit older than me. I think he was a little bit older than me. He was immigrant. He was an immigrant from El Salvador, just like my background. Even though I was born here in this country, but he was probably a few years older than me. But he had a job. He already had a part-time job. His parents made him work and stuff, right? Definitely growing up a little bit different than I did. But anyway, I just remember playing there for a little while, and then out of nowhere, this kid shows up, right? I remember this kid shows up on a skateboard. He has a Chicago Bulls hat, because back then the Chicago Bulls were winning a bunch of NBA championships. That was the team to wear. You either wore the Chicago Bulls or a Chicago White Sox baseball hat. That was a cool thing. I didn't know about fashion trends. I didn't know it was trendy. I didn't know none of that stuff. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even allowed. To wear stuff like that. I wasn't allowed to wear back then they had a Bugs Bunny shirts, t-shirts, where they would dress up with urban gear, stuff like that. I wasn't even allowed to wear. I had to wear just whatever clothes my parents thought was okay. And it wasn't fashionable, it wasn't trendy, it wasn't anything like that. It wasn't anything like an American kid would want to wear. So I just remember him showing up to skateboard, and I just thought he was the coolest guy ever. I thought he was the coolest kid ever. He definitely looked like the way that any kid in America growing up at that time would look like. And certainly wasn't me, because I wasn't allowed to even do all that. So I just remember he was coming back home from somewhere. I don't know where he was coming back from, but he stopped and thought, hey, this kid has a football. Let's toss a football around a little bit. So that's how we became friends, and so we became friends, and it didn't really mean much at that time because we were kids. I was more worried about having another kid to play with, but he had his dad. And I don't know. It seemed like the world was perfect. It seemed like his world was developing perfectly. Anyway, so I would play with this kid, whenever, he was around and was wanting to play in the front yard. But the difference with this kid was he was allowed to go places. He was allowed to go anywhere. He had a lot more freedom than I did. And he couldn't understand that I didn't have the same freedom. But he would bring around other kids, and I just knew that they were a little bit different. I knew that they were thinking a little bit differently. They were interested in things a little bit differently, you know what I mean? And he brought around some other friends, and I don't know how I knew this, but some of those kids that were coming around, they also had their dads. And so for me, now that I'm as old as I am and I look back, I'm like, these kids are growing up with their dads, they're growing up with their moms, they have both parents in the house. I don't get why you would want to be a badass. I don't know why you would want to be bad, a little baddie. I don't know what the term is nowadays, but, growing up, there was a term. I don't know why they wanted to be, little badasses, little bad kids, baby's kids, that kind of stuff. So I found it odd that they had both parents, but they wanted to be bad, I thought it was usually kids that grew up with no dad, the ones that turned out to be criminals and thugs, which, I guess what you can say is, doesn't really, in this case, it doesn't really matter if you had your dad or not. It's a personal choice. It's a personal choice whether you want to be bad, whether you want to throw your life away or be a badass or a thug, whatever. It's just a personal choice, But I wouldn't come to find that out until like years later. Years later, I would come to find out how much that was a personal choice and not really necessarily your environment or how you grew up or your household dynamics. Did it help? Yeah, no, obviously it didn't help, growing up without a dad. That didn't help the situation, but yeah, I mean, I later on in life, I would come to find out how much personal choice is so important and how much that plays a big role. So anyway, yeah, I mean, so I grew up in this kind of situation. And when we got to high school, that's when I started experimenting with doing the same thing they were doing, We started experimenting, with different things, skipping school, going to ditch parties, and doing crazy things at ditch parties, And I gotta be honest with you, it's so funny because I stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, I stood out like a sore thumb. I looked like I didn't belong there. I was told so many times, you look like you would never do this. You look like you would never skip school or blaze. I can't tell how many times I was told, man, you look like you look like you don't belong here. You look like you're out of place. And I thought that was funny. But anyway, this is the first podcast. I don't want to go too long. There's many more thoughts that I'll be sharing. So this is, I'll try to put one out every one podcast a week. I mean, I am sort of, I do have, kids and stuff like that. So I do have to prioritize and keep my schedule organized. But yeah, I mean, that's the plan, is to put one out every week, share my experience, share my thoughts. I think that it's very important to talk about this.